Raji. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Yeah, very good. Very nice to see you back in Hawaii, aren't
I'm
you?
back in Hawaii, Costa del Derby, I think.
Lovely, lovely. Yeah.
Let me come somewhere a bit more less distracting, shall we say?
Okay. I
Tuesday.
don't mind Hawaii, but
Hawaii's all right.
Yeah, Hawaii's absolutely fine.
Let's take you to India.
Okay.
How's that?
Okay, lovely. Yes. Whereabouts is that?
That's Amritsar. So that's Baba Tal Rai Gurdwara, around the back of Harmandir Sahib.
Right, right. Okay, wonderful, wonderful.
So, how are you?
Yeah, I'm good. I'm good. So I'm really looking forward to this discussion, which kind of follows on from the things that we've been talking about earlier about leadership. And in this case, it's more specifically about the Sustainable Development Goals, because these goals are universal, I suppose, in a sense, aren't they? And every community needs to have some sort of idea about how we attain them. And with your involvement in Sikhi and the Sikh community, and also as a professional with your construction work and everything, it's like, which of these goals are most kind of at the forefront of your mind most of the time? Because for me, it's like mostly inequalities. That is kind of always what I'm thinking about in education. It's about equality, social justice, but the others are important as well. So what is it that kind of focuses your attention more?
I think, like you just said, as a Sikh, and then I'll say as a proper Sikh, not that I'm saying I'm a proper Sikh, but as a proper Sikh, when you look at Sikhi and its teachings, many of these are just subsets of the greater equality, like you said. What is equality? It's not just equality of opportunity, it's equity in that opportunity. And equality, whether it's, I'm referring to 17 because I can't remember them all.
Yeah, I can kind of remind you of them. Like some of them to do with hunger, some of them are to do with education, some of them are to do with climate action, which includes.
Well, if you look at the equality ones straight away, I've got them in front of me. No poverty, zero hunger, good health, quality education, gender equality, clean water, affordable energy, decent economic growth, and
affordable energy,
to work.
for example.
It's very relevant, but all those are what, as a Sikh, you should be practicing those day in, day out anyway. Sarbat Tapala means, what are you thinking about? It should be all of those things.
When we think about things like affordable energy, like we're currently in a crisis, regardless of where we are in the world. Some people will be able to afford to heat their homes this winter without anxiety, and others will have to think twice about it. So you see, even something like that, maybe a couple of years ago, whether we heat our homes or whether we spend that money on food, more food and whatever, then it wasn't really an issue, but now it's become an issue for a lot of people. So we can't take any of these things for granted, can we?
Absolutely. And I think we can be very careful that we don't look at what the current crisis is through sort of a rose-tinted glasses or get put off by that. In the West, we have had very, very stable governments for many decades. Perhaps the last 70, 80 years now since the Second World War. The economy of Western Europe, the economies of America, Canada, been very stable. Many of the other economies in the world have not been stable. Russia suffered a very major jolt to its, or the Soviet Union as was, to its economy 30 years ago. The Far East is always in turmoil. India, only a couple of years ago, when the banking system, the notes that we're talking about were taken out of circulation, that was a jolt to the system. No economy can withstand a sudden jolt to its system. But most economies in the world have, in the last 20, 30 years, experienced some sort of sudden change. And maybe it's our turn now. But what is going around about the cost of energy, the cost of food, has happened in many other countries. Inflation is happening in other countries. Argentina is an example of every 20, 30 years is going through silly rates of inflation, thousands of percentage of inflation. They've got through it. So we will get through this, but it does, what the biggest concern we should have and something we should address is, how does the gap between those who have and those that don't have get narrower? It's getting wider. How do we bring it back so that those who are without, the ones who are having to choose between heating and eating, how do we make it more equitable for them, that those choices are less of a burden? There always will be, there always have been. How does it become less painful, more bearable?
Well, during Thatcher's time, remember she was saying there's no such thing as society, and that you have to get on your bike, basically go to where the job is. And so that comes at a cost. If when people leave their communities and go to the cities to work, that comes at a cost of weakening relationships. And when we talk about these sudden jolts to our economy, those with strong family relationships, they will naturally survive more effectively because they have a stronger safety net.
Yes, there's always strength in numbers, isn't it? It's a basic concept, it's a key concept of, grist mara doesn't mean getting married and living a family life. It's more than that. It's multi-generational. It's across your, why do we have, this is a Punjabi culture thing, but why, or an Indian culture thing, why do we call it Taya and Chacha differently? They're both your father's brothers, but there are different relationships there, and there are different expectations, there's different responsibilities. So when it comes to sustainability generally, I mean, the 17 goals, half of them are about sustainability, about making sure that we leave something to our next generation. And if we don't, if we consume everything now, what will the next generation have? But then the next generation also has a responsibility to take what is there and make the best of it, so they can pass it on and so forth. So sustainability is one thing, and weathering economic jolts is just part of that. We've got to get on with it. Charity Kalavasta is, pain is not going to go away, but if I've got the strength to deal with that pain, maybe I've got a chance to get through the adversity that I'm facing right now.
And when we think about decent work, for example, goal number 8, decent work, again, like related to that thing of like a lot of the decent, work that we think is decent, like professional, like people would say being a teacher is decent work, being a lawyer is decent work, being a doctor is decent work, so sometimes we have to leave our families and go to the cities where it's easier to get those kinds of jobs. But again, that could come at a cost of well-being, like somebody could be living abroad, far away from, thousands of miles away from their family, and so they have a good career, but they don't have strong well-being because their support structure is so far away.
It's that all the quality against quantity. I've got all the money in the world, but I've got no happiness. And finding that balance is a personal endeavor. Societies, you may be in society, a sangat that looks after each other, but at the end of the day, the strength to choose between these difficult choices. Do I want all the money by spending 80 hours a week on my job and and not being there for family, or am I there for my family and not working? That's the other extreme, and they're then suffering. Or what's the fine balance in between where you do get to both? Like I said, Thatcher not necessarily started it, but there is this culture of you must work all the hours. You must forsake niceties and family life, and work as hard as possible, as many hours as possible. Visibility at work, not necessarily productivity. Those have been ingrained into us, and unfortunately, we have to disagree with Thatcher. Did some good things, did some bad things. So again, any politician won't always get it right, won't always get it wrong. But there was a seed of something wrong set in at the time about the individual over society. The individual is part of society. Society needs individuals. It needs individuals to flourish, to take the crowd along forwards. But society is far bigger. It doesn't pull you back. It supports you. Proper society, properly something. It supports you. So well, actually, in our group, Benji, you're an academic. You're really good at this. Please take this forward for us. And once you accept that responsibility, rather than saying, "Oh, I'm doing this because I'm better than you," that's ahankar, that's arrogance. And she accepted responsibility to the wider community, society. Then I think everyone goes further. And we're now suffering or feeling the pain of that in my lifetime. Anyway, what Thatcher started 40 years ago. Yeah, everyone's an individual. There is no thing such as society. I'm sorry, there is society. COVID taught us.
Well, something, again, it's to do with talking about this and responsible consumption. In the past, let's go back to our parents' generation. If there was going to be a wedding in the family, this happened with my own brothers and my sisters' weddings in Stafford. If there was a wedding in the family, we didn't hire a hall. We just invited the local community. There were about 30 families like living around us, 30 Sikh families, and they came, and we put up a tent in the garden, and everyone helped, chipped in to do the cooking. You know, like the women came all week, you know, like to make the laddu and you know, things like that, whatever. And so you see, responsible consumption now, none of my nieces and nephews, they wouldn't dream of doing that. It's like you know, you hire this big hall, and you hire a wedding planner, you know, everything is paid for, and there is so much cost involved and so much waste involved.
It's the adage of keeping up with the Joneses, or I've got the money, why am I going to spend it on? Well, I'll spend it on my own self. But that's what it is. It creates some memories, but not as good memories as, ooh, a nice cup of tea here for my son. It doesn't create the memories of what you're saying about the ties going forward. I remember those times when, you know, you had the wedding at the Gurdwara. You had to go there early as a family, prepare things. You might have got a Hawaiian to help you, but then washing the dishes afterwards was your responsibility. You know, it just was, and everybody chipped in.
Yes.
Now it's all paid for. It's excessive. It has always been like that. There have always been the elite in society who buy services in. It's been really good last 30, 40 years that our community, the Sikh community, Indian community, Punjabi community, call it whatever brand you want to call it, it's been prosperous. It's come here. It's actually put some of the UN goals into practice. It's gone out. It's worked hard. It's created opportunities, employed others, and it's some of the elite. In that, the number of elite has gone bigger. I mean, the Sikh community, by faith, I understand, is the second most affluent society in the UK. You know, the GDP per family or per person is you know, way ahead of every other society except of the Jewish community, where it's, you know, a little bit behind. So we have prospered. So we have made that excessive income, shall we say? Well, yeah, you're right. We've gone, as I always say, we've gone and partied on the mountain. You know, when Moses came back from having collected the word of God, everyone's partying behind him, and we've done that. We've forgotten our maker, and we've gone beyond what is reasonable and partied too hard. A lot of that's coming back now. People are realizing you don't need 5,000 people at your wedding. It can be a couple of hundred, you know, people from either side. My wedding, you know, my dad said, you know, upset a lot of people in the family. Said, no, it's not discriminatory, but I don't want to put a burden on the, you know, my daughter-in-law's family, your in-laws, by taking every Tom, Dick, and Banto along. He said, right, we're taking a coach. There'll be men only, Janet. Yeah, women will stay at home. And he says it's not discriminatory, but if I take everyone along, even women come on, it'll be 4 times, 5 times the number of people, because then you've got to take the kids along. They said, and he upset people, but actually, you know, we had 100 people from our side, 100 people from their side. It's a nice wedding, and it was all manageable. But you're right, what do we do now? We turn up in a hall, 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, waiting for dinner. Most of us sat there waiting for dinner. A few people are up there dancing away. And you say 5 o'clock or 6 o'clock, let's have dinner, and you're off home. So sustainability in a responsible consumption is, well, okay, you don't need to feed everyone, feed the needy.
Yeah, because
if you're spending £100,000 on your wedding, which is not, spend 20,000, put 80,000 towards charitable causes.
Yes,
that's responsibility.
That's absolutely right. Yes, absolutely. So yeah, you can, because some people would say, oh, you know, it might not look good, because we're very much about looking good with the community. It might not look good if we only take 100, but if you explain it to people that, well, the rest of the money that you would have spent, you're going to donate it to this charity, you know, then that kind of that seems to make it acceptable.
It sounds more acceptable if you can do that, but it takes a big mindset change and a personal change to make that change to others to follow. Most people may not follow, but at least you've done your bit. Yeah.
Yes.
I take the extreme example. Sometimes I talk about, let's look at the situation in the Punjab. Yeah. Whatever the reasons, the area of Punjab, and we can say it hasn't got water, that it has been a fertile country for millennia. In recent years, we've overexploited the earth. You know, how can you take 2, 3, 4 harvests out of the same ground in a year when it produces 1 or 2 before? We overexploit the ground. And guess what?
rice. Apparently, rice is not meant to be grown in the Punjab because it's not
Just
its
because it had,
natural
it's
land,
not a
is it?
natural place, but just because it had lots of water before, it doesn't mean it's got lots of water now. So
Mm.
we've done the wrong things for, I hate to say this, personal gain, personal profiteering. Yeah. I'm saying it's personally led, might be government led, it might be individuals, whatever the reasons for it being. But the economic model was, oh, right, make more money out of rice. It's easy, put it in the ground and forget about it. The minute the hard work has gone out, money's come in, and what we've got now, we've got barren, you know, the earth there is barren now. And they say by 2050, Punjab will be a desert.
Yeah, and they're cutting down all the trees, aren't they,
Yeah,
in
the trees have
Punjab?
been
You
cut
know,
down.
so
Yeah. So
it's
these
difficult to get
things are,
wood.
you know, things we did wrong, knowingly wrong, I think, you know, and now paying for it.
It's the short-term gain, isn't it? You know, because again, it's like culture. Usually, like when you have any community that has a very strong culture, that culture enables you to think ahead, at least 5 generations ahead.
Yeah.
Whereas without, when that culture is undermined in some way, then people only think about their own personal gain. You know, they, in a business, they will have 5-year plans rather than like the Japanese culture or the Chinese culture. They have 100-year plans.
Yeah. They've got big plans, and so yeah, some of these things will happen in a couple of years. Some of these will take longer. There might be a bit more pain, but actually we'll get to a better place. Yeah, yeah. I think I don't know whether I'm being older and getting cynical, but it almost felt like 40 years ago, it felt like the UK was planning bigger and longer. And now they can't seem to plan more than a week ahead.
They plan just the next general election. That's it.
Well, yeah, even less than that. I mean, you know, let's just take current politics, current prime minister coming in. Okay, so had a lot to deal with the Queen passing away and all that, the funeral, the mourning of the nation and so forth. There's an emotional, the country was in an emotional state. But coming through that, there are crises on the horizon. How have they dealt with it? By creating an even bigger crisis, or it feels like a bigger crisis, and it's putting people, you know, in huge worry, which is not sustainable. Yeah.
Yeah.
Obviously, if that's their desired effect, then obviously they're achieving what they desired. But it's for society, it's not a desired effect. So we'd forget the general election. We're now focusing on just the here and now, get to the weekend, you know, kind of thing, which is very sad. And it's very short and sudden. It's not good for anyone.
Yeah. The other thing that I wanted to say, like when we were talking about Thatcher, for example, I wanted to talk about the fact that round about the same time, like back in the 70s, credit cards started to be used a lot more. And so more and more, it's become part of our culture, like, you know, whether it's a wedding or a holiday, people of every community are so used to buying these things, these luxuries on credit cards, and then they end up paying interest on these cards. And so in terms of sustainability, how much can our own culture and our own education protect us from the adverse impact of buying on credit? Because it's not, you know, again, like back in the Punjab, people would borrow dani, borrow kind of manje for the wedding. You know, they wouldn't kind of hire them on, and they wouldn't spend money on credit cards for a wedding. They would just ask their neighbors, and so you were indebted to your neighbors. You would then do the same for them when their daughter got married or their son got married.
The societies were sustainable like that, they shared resources, but when times were difficult, the loan shark, shall we say, the munchi, is it, whatever you call them in Punjab, they were there, you know, the lalle, they'd lend you money. The Punjabi, I'm not very good at Punjabi colloquialisms and so forth. One I did pick up was, you know, mango teli likhao haveli. So you ask for a small amount of money, but you've got to mortgage your whole house. And in time, if the seasons weren't good, the rain didn't come, harvest wasn't particularly great, you lost your house, or it was mortgaged to your next generation. So that kind of picking on the vulnerable has happened before. I'm not saying it's right or wrong. Ultimately, it's wrong, because then you know, few people are benefiting in society. And the credit card, there was credit before. You ran a tab at your local shop, and at the end of the week when you got paid, you settled the tab. So bartering in society has always happened. It happens in most countries in the world. Yeah, the credit card is that is not Thatcherism necessarily, but it kicked off then, was right, let's borrow from the future to pay today's bills. And so what have we done? We've got credit cards, which now, you know, a lot of people can't afford the repayments on. We've mortgages are on properties. Okay, you're trying to forecast 20, 30 years ahead. Okay, they're a necessary evil, but it's the only way of getting people, you know, a roof over their head. Beyond that, if you're borrowing to then have a wedding, if you're borrowing £100,000 to run this wedding, is that the right thing? Yeah, you got to ask yourself. So why create unnecessary debt? What's the solution? I mean, there is so much debt now. I mean, the government has borrowed. So student grants, when I went to university, I got a grant. That was it. It was my £1,000 a term or whatever it was. And I made ends meet.
£500 a term.
Sorry?
I got £500 a term.
It could have been less. I can't remember what it was.
Yeah, I remember that. I remember only getting £500 a term.
So we're from an era where
we managed on that. You know, I thought I was
managed within that. Yeah. You might have got a little job at weekend or something, you know, possibly. But you could
my
manage
rent was about
that.
£17 at that time. You know, so just for context.
There you go. So I think I was paying £19 for a room, shared room in a shared flat in London, 30 odd years ago.
Yeah,
so we managed to make ends meet. You lived within your means, and you try not to get to those, you know, debt positions. Fortunately, now, you know, the government has borrowed to pay students loans to take out loans that they will pay or may not pay back in the future.
Most don't pay, you know, like most of those student loans are written off.
Yeah, so 30 years later, if you've not got to your salary, the balance, or you have got beyond the threshold, whatever's left is written off. So saying, how can that be written off? Who's going to be written off by? What's going to write it off? And I don't know.
The taxpayer, ultimately the taxpayer will.
Ultimately the taxpayer. So I think some of this, living on credit is never a good thing. Yeah, and some of it is necessary to keep businesses going, keep the economy going. But when it's long-term debt, and your debt is just growing and growing, where will it end? I don't know the answer. I'm not an economist, but it is frightening. It is worrying. If we're in a high inflation economy now, maybe inflation will write the value of that debt down, because that's what inflation does. You know, £1,000 borrowed today is not worth £1,000 in 5 years' time, when inflation's running at 7, 8, 9, 10%. So the value of money will come down. You know, and you know, a £50 note will be the common currency. Yeah, we've seen it before where. It's obviously we're a similar age. I remember half a penny.
I remember half a
small half penny. I remember the big ones, but they were around, a penny piece. And that half penny went a long way. You actually
used to buy a lot of sweets.
There's change before my time, but you could buy a lot of sweets for a penny, half a penny. Or 2.5 pence. That penny now is like a pound. That's inflation. Yeah. I don't think many of us carry anything less than a pound in change in our pockets, because maybe 50 pence, but pennies, very few. If you do, you just want to get rid of them because they're not worth a lot.
Yeah.
So pound is now the common lowest form of currency, whereas before a penny was. So that 100-fold change is, well, that's just inflation, or, you know, the economy. So if you had a £30 loan 40 years ago, which was a lot of money, it was like a month's salary, it's nothing now. So that's the magic of inflation, whether rightly or wrongly. It can be your friend as well as being your foe. So, and that's the economic model that, you know, we're pressing ahead with. It's kind of semi-sustainable, if you might say. But the thing is, it's when there's a big change, like interest rates suddenly doubling, tripling, quadrupling overnight. Those are the shocks to the system that people can't plan for. So, you know, we've got to get kids. You've got, or maybe this might turn the big party venue weddings into smaller affairs, where the people say, well, I was going to spend £100,000 on this wedding, which is quite gross, but never mind, people do it. Oh, my £100,000 isn't going to go as far now, so I can only I might spend the less, but I'll invite less guests. Or sense might kick in, well, actually let's spend less and have less guests. You know, cost is going up. Everything is a lot more expensive. How does it fit in with the Sustainable Development Goals of the UN? I really don't know. You know, economic growth, decent work, and economic growth. Economic growth relies on, you know, inflation. It relies on cost of things going up, as well as, you know, more being produced.
Well, there's a model of economics which assumes that there are enough resources for exponential growth that never kind of wanes, basically. And then we've got the circular economy, or the donut economy, where it's like, well, no, let's kind of get rid of this assumption that there's growth is going to continue to increase, because resources are limited. Resources are not continuing to increase. So when we're thinking about economics to do with tangible things like fossil fuels and that kind of energy, then we have to admit that those are not unlimited resources. And so it's about that, educating ourselves into that cyclical thing of like, well, there will be times of plenty and there will be times of adversity, and we have to manage ourselves and manage our well-being so that our relationships remain strong, both in times of plenty and also in times of stress and poverty.
Yeah, absolutely. And if we take Sikhi as a kind of our what do you call it, our foundation stone, and place that behind the 17 UN goals, you can find that actually the Sikhi Siddhant, the way we should practice and live Sikhi, supports all the 17 goals. And yes, we have to live within our means, live sensibly. Things aren't in an endless supply. Flip side is we also appreciate that human endeavor. There's 7 billion people on the planet now, is it, or whatever. I don't know what it was a decade ago. Was it 1 billion people or 500 million people? Well, it's been quite a big change in the number of people on the planet.
There's an exponential growth in population. Growth. Yeah, definitely.
But we managed to keep, apart from war and famine coming along, because famine is outside your control. War is, well, it's mad men doing mad things. People still get fed. The earth can still supply. Humans have endeavored and created food for 7 billion people. Yeah, I'm putting aside, there are areas where there isn't enough food. Even in this country, there is enough food if we distribute it properly.
That's right. But thinking about food, it links with this clean water, because one of the reasons that clean water is becoming short in supply is because we are using so much clean water in agriculture to feed cattle. So there are inequalities also in terms of what we're choosing to eat, because people who choose to eat to over-consume meat products, for example, there's a knock-on impact on supply of water.
I've heard conflicting reports. I don't know what to believe. Does it take more water to raise a cow that can then get slaughtered and feed 50 people? Or does it take more water to grow some vegetables or fruit or whatever to feed 50 people? I don't know what which is the right argument.
Well, look, let's look at let's look at it biologically. So let's say you've got 10 acres of land and you choose to sow grain to feed cattle on that 10 acres of land. Now, if that 10 acres of land is simply going to feed the cattle, that cattle is not going to feed as many people as if you planted a diverse range of vegetables on that 10 acres of land, and you'd feed your family for a few years.
Okay, yeah. I mean, I don't know the economics of agriculture, seeing how it works out. But yeah, you're right. I mean, sustainable is living off the land, isn't it? Obviously, in cold countries where
the reason I explained that really well is because this is what I learned when I was 18 years old in my biology lesson. I learned about like the food chain, and that's why I became vegetarian.
Right. Okay.
Because up until then, my mother was always a vegetarian, but my father wasn't, and so we did used to eat chicken and stuff like that. But at the age of 18, when I was doing A-level biology, it's like, no, I'm not going to do that, because we're wasting resources at every level.
So in the middle band of the earth, where the climate is fairly temperate, that argument holds perfectly still. Vegetarianism or living off the land with vegetables, barleys, crops, that's a sustainable model. Allowing for making sure you've got something aside for famine. There are years when the crop aren't so good. We've had a lot of rain recently. I think last year the crops weren't that good in the country, etc. You go to the northern and southern sort of extremes, and you find where the weather is, less temperate, their livelihoods are based on being carnivores.
Yeah, which is understandable, because in the mountains it's not good for agriculture. So in the mountains, goats are roaming around and sheep are roaming around, and it's perfectly
more natural for them to just live off the land, and then they become the food later. So the extreme extremes aside, you're right, in the middle band of the earth, where the temperature is, or the weather is more temperate. Why can't we sustain life on the land? Let the land feed the people, etc. So it can be done, and then your climate concerns are less. Whether you can eat locally, that's another thing that's happening. Let's take the UK for example. Vegetables are grown in the east and the Norfolk area quite a lot, whereas wheat and so forth is not grown over there. Okay, it's another part. So you've got to move things around. So there's transport costs. The only place where our argument or our discussion falls down is being vegetarians, being of a Punjabi nature, culture. You expect dal and stuff, lentils to be shipped in, because they can't be grown in this country, or I don't understand they can be. So you have to rely on import and export of goods to sustain everyone's diets as well. So be mindful of that, which is the kind of the dichotomy in the argument.
Yeah, I understand that, but at the same time, I try to avoid eating avocados. I do eat dal, but I try and avoid eating avocados, because I know that because avocados are seen to be the superfood, because avocado trees take up a lot of clean water, and so I know that damage is being done in South America, where land is being cleared to simply grow avocado trees, because that brings in a lot of cash, and that's not sustainable.
Same argument as with chonna or rice in the Punjab. Its economics are working, but not necessarily the economics for the land. So avocado trees, what else do they do? I mean, they're taking the Amazon down to create, so you're losing the tree, the growth, the lungs of the planet are being destroyed for some sort of economic growth model, which actually doesn't work. So there's fighting. Somebody doing the avocado farms will say, well, this is economic growth and people have decent work. Well, actually,
in the short term, it's growth in the short
the climate term. It's irresponsible, because it's not sustainable, because you're killing the lungs of the planet. So you've got to get that balance right. And so this is where 17 goals is a big number. It's and sometimes you can find an action or an activity is at opposite ends to 2 or 3 goals, and finding a happy place in the middle is challenging.
That's why I like to see them as being interconnected, because when you kind of like look at it as a complex kind of, not isolated goals, but they're all interrelated with each other, then you know that a tiny kind of choice that we make about, well, what do I choose to eat? Am I going to eat avocados? Am I going to eat chicken? What am I going to eat? And that choice about what we eat has implications, has consequences. And it's to do with like following through. It's like, where did this avocado come from? Who planted it? Where was it planted? And how far has it traveled? And, but most of the time we don't really think about these things, do we? We don't think about, the T-shirt that we've bought, where was it made? Who was paid? How much were they paid for it? And all of that. It's like it's just become so easy to consume without taking any kind of consideration to the origins of products. And
I think you said the word there, where we are added, we are just consumers. We're avid consumers. We just want to consume, and that is a very blinkered and very narrow mindset. So whether you're just whether in your food diet and whatever you do, if you become blinkered, this is the only way to do things, it's a very wrong thinking. So
let's talk about gender equality.
Consumerism. I don't know where consumerism will disappear. It's always been there. Everybody wants the gold plated, this, that, and the other. And along the way is the foods, the avocados, the spice trades of 200, 300 years ago. Spice being brought over from the east. Silk from China on the Silk Route. That's the trade.
That's the reason we're here, because of the tea trade. Because the East India Tea Company went to India, and they became so successful in exporting tea here. That's how they managed to colonize that continent.
It was economic growth for them, for one country, one little country.
Yeah.
Huge amount of economic growth across the planet. The sun never set on the empire, and everyone else suffered, and they did. That's just a part of when you have colonial powers anywhere, whichever colonial power you look at. Even some of the old Raja in India, when they expanded their empires, then not everybody was treated equally. So let's not get very, very what do you call it? Look back on history and think it was wonderful. Exploiting the vulnerable has always been at the
expense of others, right? So some people will get, every empire has depended on slave labor, has depended on exploiting those who are vulnerable.
Yeah, which is wrong, because unfortunately that's just the way, it takes one bad egg, one bad person to create that atmosphere, and then you suffer for generations. Then there's a correction. So maybe the correction is coming now, that we've actually had too much excess, too much consumerism. So perhaps it is time for the state to take control of certain things and create the environment then for maybe UN goals to be achievable and deliverable by being connected together. Sorry, you were saying?
I was saying about gender equality, because like with Sikhi, with gender equality, that was one of the fundamental core principles of gender equality. But when we look at the Gurdwara and we look at the senior leadership in the Gurdwaras, there's very few women who are in that senior leader position. There will be women on the committees, but they don't rise above that committee level. They don't rise to becoming presidents of the Gurdwaras. Why do you think that is?
My Mossi was a president of Gurdwara. I know someone else up in Bradford is a president of Gurdwara. Nottingham had a president who was a lady. So I think they do occur. They do happen. The challenge, I'll give you my personal example. So I'm a secretary in Gurdwara. Okay, I work at a national level as well. And if my wife was to try and do that, she's perfectly capable, something would have to give. And she chooses to look after the kids, or when they were younger, fairly independent now. But she chose, she said, well, I don't want to help you with that. I'll be your quiet helper in the background. Now, I don't know if that's right or wrong. Is that equality, or is it equality of opportunity? So there's nothing stopping. We shouldn't stop people who are wanting to do, women, so let's take it as women, who want to be in positions of responsibility in Gurdwara, say, or any institution. We should ensure that the playing field is level for everyone. At least they have the choice. Whether they choose to exercise that choice or not, that's up to them. And this is where it's a very difficult question to answer. Do we need leaders, or is a leader someone who's just involved, not necessarily leading from the front, a figurehead? So do we need the women in the committees making decisions? Do we want them to be the president? Because what inevitably happens in a Gristmarik, because we're taught that Gristmarik, the family life, is the best religion, it's the best faith, it's the best way of living. You've got to look at the practicalities in the family. I'd love every 20-year-old, 25-year-old woman to be a president of Gurdwara, 30-year-old woman to be president of Gurdwara, but sometimes it's not practical. I don't know the answer to this. I'm not saying we should deny those. When we looked at moving our Gurdwara, when was it, about 12 years ago, we encouraged the young girls in the community to come forward, and that came with brilliant ideas. 5 years later, they've all left because most of them got married, left the town, went to other towns, started young families, and they aren't as involved as the last 10, 12 years. They haven't been involved in any of the institutions because life is there as well to get on with.
And this is the response that we usually get, because, as you know, I work with senior leaders and I work on the MBA programs, and I notice even in my own results, like when the senior leaders they complete their courses, at present 100% of my senior leaders who get distinction grades are men, 100%. And about more than 90% of them are white men. And the women, very, very small percentage,
Mm.
and they get merits, even though, in my view, their work is just as good as the men who get distinctions. Their work is just as good, but it's not seen to be as good. So when they get examined, they're perceived to be merit rather than distinction, which is a subtle difference, but it's a difference that can be a difference in terms of a scale in the salary, you know. So it is quite significant. And so when people will say, oh, but women prefer to look after their families and they don't want to take these senior leader roles, and that's usually the argument that's given. And you know, and so I think that it can be, well, are we doing enough to be flexible enough so that women don't have to sacrifice looking after their family? Because yes, they do want to look after their family, but is there enough flexibility? Is there enough kind of innovative thinking so that there is space for them to be? Because for me, senior leadership is about making decisions. And so we need to have like equality in terms of who are the decision makers, and we shouldn't have to sacrifice our family lives in order to be there at the table to make decisions.
I absolutely agree with you, and I don't know the answer, other than there's different facets to this. So let's take the workplace. So a small, medium enterprise or a large corporate company, they can put in place policies, should they wish, which are family friendly. Yeah. So if a woman's given a choice, it's either you look after your kids or you come to work. They'll pick their kids up anytime. And that's a sensible choice, in the sense that they're making it for the right, not the right reasons, but for the right choice, family first. Wrong of the employer to put them in that position. So if they can have policy, well, guess what? They'll get the best out of that woman, that man. And there is a bit of balancing going on. So I do know many families where the woman is working as the breadwinner and the husband's at home looking after the kids, because that's the choice they made. But it's very difficult, because the time she was having the kids, they were struggling, which is practically, you know, men can't have babies yet. So that happens in your 20s and 30s. So it is a very difficult choice at that time. And if a woman wants to come back into employment later, the skill sets have changed, the experience is different. So it's the dice are loaded against women. If we want to get the best, so in a work environment, you've got to give them an environment where they can stay engaged, even if it's on a part-time basis, flexible hours, working from home. There's so many ways of doing it. COVID has shown that it's all possible.
Absolutely.
If the will is there, you can make it happen. Okay. Now, moving to the Gurdwara situation. Why is it's always the women in the kitchen cooking? Yet when you look on TV, who are the cooks, who are the best cooks? The men. It doesn't make sense. Yeah, again, there's a dislink somewhere. So whilst we say we appreciate women and what they do, I think it's more lip service than actual reality. Would a woman want to get onto committee and into a president's role? Everyone I've asked say, no, not really. You just carry on, do the paperwork. We're happy to just Seehra and Seehra in a leadership way, not in a subservient way.
Yeah. What I notice is that in the gurdwaras where people are paid to do the seva of the langar, it's usually men. So that's, and I see the women making the roti, but the men are doing like they've been paid to do.
Okay. I haven't got experience of gurdwaras paying. I know they do, because obviously it's a big gurdwara, needs to pay people to keep the service going. So in the langar, I mean, my personal belief is a gurdwara should not be that big that you have to employ people in the langar. If it's too big, have two gurdwara. Yeah. So gurdwara should reflect the sangat that comes to it, not just people hate me for this, as a hotel. You pop along, have a 5-course meal and go and go home. That's not what gurdwara is. Gurdwara is a sangat that's built around the people, knowing the people, supporting each other. Back to what you said at the beginning about relationships between people. You get those right, then no one's a pradhan, no one's a cook, you might say. No one's on any extreme. So when as a responsible person in the committee, as a trustee in the committee, I have to make a decision. I don't make the decisions. I roll out what the sangat wishes. So it's bottom up. So you've got to listen, but not everyone can see through the problem sometimes. They don't know the full piece. But you have to reach out to the women, the men who say, well, what do you reckon to this? All right, that's a different take on things. And then you have to make a decision, which is then for the benefit of everyone, not just one or two individuals. Yeah, yeah. Let's not step too far into good. I mean, happy to discuss this if you want. I personally think, you know, any good that serves more than maybe a couple of thousand people is too big. Yeah. So if your membership's more than 2,000 people, it's too big.
Well, there used to be, wasn't there this kind of rule of like communities used to be about 150 people? You know, I've read it somewhere, like sociologically, like villages were usually established with about 150 people. That would be like a strong community. And I mean, when I go to Stafford, that kind of evidence fits in there as well, because it's about 100 and 150 people and everyone knows each other. Whereas in Birmingham or in London, I go to very large gurdwaras here. No one knows me.
No one knows. No one knows anyone there either. So when you're visiting, that's different. But when you're in the city, so in Derby last week, we put the foundation stone down for a fifth gurdwara. So there's fifth gurdwara being built. So I'm a assistant secretary in one, and I've been asked by fifth gurdwara to come and help them with the foundation stone ceremony. Now, some people say, "What are you doing? They're your competition," but they're not. If they've got a sangat, a community of people they're going to serve, what's wrong with that? That's a proper gurdwara then. If they're setting up as a business, that's wrong motives. But it feels like they've got a community of 400 or 500 people and they want to create a gurdwara. So as a Sikh, my responsibility is first for the prachar of the Guru Granth Sahib. You know, buildings come and go, but the prachar is the naam. That's the thread that runs through. So wherever Guru Sahib is going to go and sit, the naam and prachar is going to happen, then we should support it. Yeah, but not all Sikhs will think like that. So no, they're competition, but we've got to kind of cut them down. Let's berate them on news feeds and so forth, which is the wrong way.
It
is.
So
my personal belief is, if it's good that this center is too big, it's the wrong model. We don't need. It'd be nice to have a city with one gurdwara. Yes, if you've got a few thousand Sikhs. Yeah, so 150. I've heard that is traditionally a community started with a couple of hundred people. Yeah, and that was because they had all the skill sets to service each other and look after the land and so forth. And the little villages. That's why in India, villages every 3 or 4 miles. Yeah, so there was lots of little communities, but they worked together when necessary. Yeah, we've got cities now, and cities are soulless places if you're not careful.
So I suppose this kind of links in with the goal 11 about sustainable cities and communities. It's like I suppose there's like Stafford for me is like my village, whereas Birmingham and London obviously are cities. And how do we create kind of these sustainable partnerships between those of us who live in the cities and those who live in the villages? Even now, like, more and more people are going to live in the smaller villages, but they don't have gurdwaras there. So how do they remain kind of connected with the communities?
So question is, will there be enough Sikhs living in this small village to create a community, or are the people going to the villages, to use a better word, I don't know, sannyasis? They're now leaving everything behind and want to be on their own. Because if they want, because a lot of the people go to the village, should let go of everything. I just want to be in the village, away from everyone. Well, you can't be away from everyone and be with everyone. So you have to have a choice. If you want to be with your community, then we be with your community. Move into the area where they live and so forth. Yeah. So Birmingham is a big area. If your community is Soho Road, why have you got a house in Solihull? You're disconnected straight away. Yeah. So if you're in the Soho Road, not necessarily saying that if that's where you grew up, stay there. If you've got to prosper and so forth, you can move. Our parents came 5,000 miles and are here with nothing, and now they set us up. So if you've grown up in Soho Road area and you move to Solihull for whatever reason, work related, family related, now you're in Solihull, go and create the community in Solihull. Go and create it. So if you're in the little village in Stafford or whatever, create a community there. It doesn't have to be of Sikhs. Create a vibe which is based around the Sikh values. Yeah, and people will appreciate you for it. Yeah, it's not saying turning them into Sikhs. So collaborate with the society and community that's around you, and just, you know, Jardi Kala, you know, that kind of mental thinking, and Sabat Tapala. If you can take that anywhere, then you're actually creating a community of Sikhs anywhere, if that makes sense.
This links with the quality of education as well then. So, you know, I suppose everything can come under the umbrella of quality of education. We have to learn how to be part of a community in a way, especially when we're leaving our own community and forming another community, like how to collaborate, how to co-create things together, you know.
So the question is back to what we started with. What is education? Is it what you learn when you go to school? Is it what you experience as you're growing up? So that nature and nurture and argument, what you're born with. What is education? And unfortunately, we're not given the right education in this country. We're kind of told about certain things. As soon as you turn 18, you're in the real world. Most kids don't know how to write a check out. Well, a check's the whole thing, but a lot of them don't know how to manage their finances.
Well, yeah, absolutely true.
A lot of them don't know how to fill forms in. I'm sorry to hate to say it, but many don't.
That's because the education's not tailored for individual needs. It's like we kind of like have this mass education as though, you know, this everything, like we're treating students like factory kind of production objects.
Method, and everybody given us, you need some sort of consistency in this education. So are we teaching them the right skills for living? So there's education, and then there's what I call wisdom. Yeah, so you can have an innate wisdom, but actually be unpardoned. You may have no qualifications to your name, no, totally uneducated, but you're a very wise person because there is something that you've experienced or you've been around people that you can share that wisdom with people. So it's that fine balance. So what is education? It is more than just book learning. Yeah, you can learn all the books, but if you don't put them into practice, what's the point of reading them in the first place?
Well, you know how Guru Nanak Dev Ji lived in a very different context compared with Guru Gobind Singh Ji. They lived in very different context, and therefore their behavior was very different. You know, so what the disruption that Guru Nanak Dev Ji caused in his context, in terms of equalities, in terms of getting different castes to sit together, that was appropriate and relevant in that context. That was the rebellion that he caused. But during Guru Gobind Singh Ji's time, the situation had totally changed, and so for him, the rebellion, you know, meant creating an army to defend the faith, etc., to defend the right to value, you know, values and whatever. So you see, during that kind of like period between Guru Nanak Dev Ji and Guru Gobind Singh Ji, the context changed, and they responded to their context in appropriate ways. Now here we live in England, and we know that some of our community are homosexual, or some of them, they want to donate their organs to somebody, and you know, or they want to live alone, or you know, different lifestyles basically. And so for me, education, it's about being able to think for ourselves and to adapt to the environment the way it is. And so we don't kind of like judge the person who is homosexual by saying, oh, but that's not part of our culture. Well, it wasn't part of our culture before, but it's a part of our culture now. And we have to adapt to what is now. And donating a kidney wasn't part of our culture 100 years ago because you know, it just wasn't available. But we have to think about these things now, don't we? We have to think about things that we didn't have to think about before, and our Sikhi can help us to think with compassion, can help us to think with, you know, like in terms of, is this in alignment with God's will?
Well, I think what we've lost is a link to our past in many ways. So let me just take one example which really kind of hits me between the eyes. So you said there about kidneys or lungs or whatever it might be, organ transplants. So it's possible now. It's been around for 50, 60, 70 years now. It's possible, so it can be done. When you give a kidney, you have an emotional link to the person that you're giving it to if you know them, or if you give it blindly, that's different. But you've given it, you got two of them, you're still around, aren't you?
Mm-hmm.
Can you imagine 100 years ago, 150 years ago? And I've heard these stories, and I know about them, and I know them in recent years as well, where a mother gives birth to a child and gives that child to someone in the family as their child.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, so giving a kidney is physical, it's painful, but you've got two of them. Giving a child away, because that family can't have children, might be your brother's family, your sister's family, or whatever. So in the family, but that child then is brought up by someone else, that emotional pain. So I think we've always had that, we forget that kind of lesson, that as a bunt, we were rescuing the daughters of anyone who was abducted, regardless of who they were. So we were defending their rights. To give a child away, the emotional baggage is for life. So we've had that empathy in us. Now, whether that's a Sikh thing or a Punjabi thing, you know, it gets mishmashed. But you know, if you can do that, you would do that, and we have done that in the past. So we now lose the context because there's a new generation. There's a gap between our first generation that came into the country and third, fourth generation here now. We've lost those stories because nobody wants to sit with their elders and hear these stories.
Yeah, because nowadays I can see, like, my nephews and nieces, they would see, like, oh, how could you do that? It's so cruel to give up your child. They would see it as being very cruel. Whereas yourself and myself, because we still have that link with our parents, we can see the altruism involved. In that.
But also is thinking for the bigger good. You're helping someone, and you know, not everybody has IVF treatment. You know, can't afford it, can't have it. But it's available now, so it can be obtained. But years ago, that wasn't the norm. You know, if God didn't want you, know, if nature did not want you to have children, you didn't have children. So the husband would kick the wife out and might marry someone else.
Yeah,
you're ruining your life. Yeah. So these things happened, good and bad. And now the good and bad is just a different thing. So accepting homosexuals, you know, kidney transplants, organ donations. And the question is, why not? How were they treated before? How should you treat them now? And quite frankly, they are all acceptable parts of life. Yeah. What did people donate before? They couldn't donate organs because the operations weren't there, but they donated in different ways.
Yes.
So it's a different, the context, like you said, from Guru Nanak Dev Ji to Guru Gobind Singh Ji, context varied and changed. Guru Nanak was the rebel.
Yes. And Guru Gobind Singh Ji was.
Guru Gobind Singh Ji said, right, the rebels now need to defend themselves. Yeah, because over that 200 years, they'd become a thorn in the administration, the Rajas, the emperors, the Badshahs of the time.
Yeah.
We'd become a individual gone.
Yeah, so you see, that's going back to education. Like, so what is quality education? Well, that is like sikhna. It's about learning, and
continuously learning.
We can't, sorry?
Continuously learning.
Yeah, that's right. Continuously learning.
Yeah. So even this conversation, I picked up a few tips and things that you've shared. Oh, okay, that's an interesting way of looking at things. You know, I had an experience of the weekend with someone, and we were sat somewhere, and the three of us, and we were chatting, and we said, you know, the things are never black and white, are they? Oh, no, there's shades of grey, this, that, and the other. I said, well, look, everything's had two sides, doesn't it? And they said, yeah, it does. I said, no, actually, everything has three sides. So what do you mean three sides? So I got a coin out of my pocket. I said, what do you see? And they said, well, heads. I turned it over. So what do you see now? Tails. So, yeah, so how many sides has the coin got? Two, heads and tails. I said, no, and I stood it on its edge.
Yeah.
I said, can you see the third side now? One person was saying, I can see heads, I can see tails. So, well, just look over the top. It's just a line, it's an edge. There's a third side. There is always a third side, or a third way of looking at things. And, you know, careful. You know, black and white.
And I would say that,
It's not the 1 hour mark, is it?
I would say that there's even more than three sides. I would say that there's at least four sides, because there's the 3D and there's the 4D, because there's an inside to that coin as well, isn't there?
Absolutely. So the main thing here is about education. Isn't just about seeing things as they are. It's being able to interpret them and the ability to think outside the box, think outside those two sides, come a third, the fourth. Is there a better way of doing this under the current circumstances? If we live in the past, you know, this is one danger Sikhi is taking at the moment, is resurrecting the past as the model for the current and future. Some aspects are good, many aspects aren't. It's gonna, you know, Sikhi is a progressive religion, faith. It's progressed from Guru Nanak Dev Ji through Guru Gobind Singh Ji through to now. We've survived, we've evolved. Our what you call it, Maryada, our mainstay is still the same. It's the Gurbani, or from the Gurbani, you know, whatever the Gurbani says, if we accept that it is for all eternity, not just for 300, 400, 500 years ago, but it is applicable as now, and it will be in the future. How we apply it is up to us.
Yeah,
I think that's the biggest lesson.
absolutely.
You know, educate yourself. Just because you know the Japji Sahib, have you looked at it a bit deeper? Look at it a bit deeper, de-layer it, understand it, and when you start to do that kind of internalization of Gurbani, Naam, that's what it is. It's not just about reciting the name, it's reciting, understanding it, discovering it, and then making it a part of your whole. That is real education. And even with any other education, even if it's understanding economics of Thatcherism, don't just look at the headlines, look at what was behind the headlines, then understand the reasoning for it, the time and context at the time for going down that route. And then you'll start to have insights into developing your own education wisdom that allows you to then apply the rules to now and the future, and make sure the future is a sustainable future. Yeah.
Okay, wonderful.
That's a lot of deep thinking there.
Yeah, a lot of ideas generated there. So thank you very much, Ranjit Singh Ji. And